The door to the enclosure was already open when the handlers decided they had made a mistake. There were 300 cadets pressed against the reinforced glass of the Fauna Annex observation gallery. The annex held 40. Nobody had checked the sign on the door because the sign on the door had never mattered before, and the cadets had been filing in for 11 minutes before anyone thought to count. The handlers were armored, full contact-rated suits, the kind with the extra seal at the throat, the kind that got issued for level 4 interactions and above. They were standing at the threshold of the enclosure with the kind of stillness that meant they had already done the math and did not like the answer. The human walked past them. She was not armored. She was wearing the standard cadet uniform, gray-green with the exchange cohort patch on the left shoulder, and she had a field notebook tucked into her breast pocket. She checked the clasp on it before she crossed the threshold, a small, automatic gesture, the kind you make before something you think might be interesting. She crouched. Not a roar, not a record, not a dominance display. Just a human, making herself small in a space that held something that had sent 14 beings to the medical wing in 31 days of attempted contact. And she crouched the way you crouch when you are trying to look less like a threat and more like a question. She did not look at its eyes. The cub was 12 meters away. It was the size of a ground vehicle, scaled in something that was not quite black. The light slid off it instead of reflecting, like the scales were deciding what to do with whatever hit them. 3 tails moved in different registers. The lowest one dragged the floor. The highest one was still. The sound it made came up through the floor first. One note, one long, resonant note that the reinforced glass did not entirely stop, that the cadets felt in their feet before they heard it with their ears. That bypassed the part of the brain that processes sound and went straight to the part that makes decisions about exits. The cub crossed 12 meters in 4 seconds. It stopped just short of her, not at her, near her, close enough that its breath moved the front of her hair. She raised her hand. She put it on its skull. The xenobiology recorder had been logging continuously for 11 days. She had used, across those 11 days, 17 different category tags, filed 9 supplementary notes, and cross-referenced 4 separate interaction frameworks from 3 different concordant species databases. Her final entry for this session was one word, the part that still keeps the xenobiologists up at night. That comes after the door opens. 11 days earlier, the field notebook had been opened to a fresh page. Ren Adisa sat in the back row of orientation briefing Hall C and tried to keep her face neutral. This was harder than it sounded. The document Wing Commander Ossel had just placed on every cadet's desk had a cover page, and the cover page had a title, and the title read, "Caution, contents may cause existential recalibration." She was fairly sure it was not meant to be funny. Ossel stood at the front of the room. He was Vorath adjacent, a Chelhari, which meant a broad chitinous shell at the back of the neck, 4 primary arms, 2 secondary ones that moved constantly at his sides in small adjustments the translator rendered as punctuation. His amber banding had not faded once in the 40 minutes since he'd walked in. Ren had already learned that amber meant something. She had written it in the notebook. She had not yet learned what. "You are exchange cadets," Ossel said. His secondary arms made a small, tight movement. "You are guests. You are, in the eyes of Concordance Protocol, passive witnesses only. This document outlines what that means." The cadet to Ren's left was a Pelhari Keth named Civil. He had 3 mouths, and the color range of a mood ring the size of a dinner plate, and right now he was reading the document with the focused attention of someone who had already decided to be worried. He had gone a muted orange somewhere around page 4. The cadet to Ren's right was a Thurvani named Gorak. She was broad, gray-green, and built like a structural element. She had 7 arms, 4 of which were crossed. She had not opened the document. She was watching Ossel with the focused attention of someone deciding what something was worth. Ren turned to page 1 of the document. Page 1 was a list of 4 rules. Rule 1, no unsanctioned contact with station fauna. Rule 2, no entry into restricted atmospheric zones without a cleared suit. Rule 3, all Earth origin fauna must complete full decontamination before interaction clearance. Rule 4, passive witness only, no interference with ongoing xenobiological assessments. Ren read all 4 rules. She wrote field notebook log everything at the top of her fresh page. Then she wrote below it, orange equals worried. She had been on Pelvenreth Station for 40 minutes. She had already filed 0 citations. That number would not last. Pelvenreth Station was a multi-ring structure, 5 rings at different atmospheric tolerances, connected by junction corridors that smelled like 3 different things, depending on which 2 rings you were between. The junction between Ring 2 and Ring 3 smelled like wet stone and recycled coolant. The junction between Ring 3 and Ring 4 smelled like something Ren could not identify, but that made her think of the barn in late summer, the specific warm heaviness of it, which she decided not to examine too carefully because she was fairly sure it was not the barn. The human exchange cohort had arrived 11 days ago. There were 6 of them. They had been assigned to Residential Cluster 7, which was in Ring 3, which smelled like the better one. Ren's roommates were Civil, who was now firmly orange most of the time and whose color she had been logging carefully; Gorak, who had not spoken a translated word to Ren in 11 days and who spent most evenings sharpening something against a flat stone with a sound like a file against metal; and Foss, a Crescian, whose atmospheric suit had not been cleared for Ring 3 air once in 11 days and who communicated primarily through suit fog density, which Ren had begun to treat as a language. She had 3 entries in the field notebook on her roommates. Civil, orange equals surrender, confirmed day 4, when he stopped arguing about the canteen station schedule. Orange-gray equals something worse than surrender. Gorak, grinding equals approval. Complete stillness equals assessment. All 7 arms crossed equals. She has decided something is not worth her time yet. Foss, fog equals everything. Light fog equals mild concern. Full fog equals do not open that door. The maintenance logs for Residential Cluster 7 had not recovered from the first week. This was not entirely Ren's fault, but it was mostly Ren's fault, and she had signed the incident report that said so. 9 citations in 11 days. Ossel's amber banding had not faded once. She was refilling her water canteen at the corridor station between Ring 3 and the Fauna Annex approach corridor when she first made the sound. She had not planned to make it. The Pelhariketh cadet down the hall, not Civil, a different one she didn't know, had gone purple, which she had not seen before and which meant something she hadn't logged yet. Purple might be distress. Purple might be the Pelhariketh equivalent of holding very still. She did not know. She made the sound without thinking about it. It was not quite a growl. It was not quite a hum. It lived below the register of words, below the register of what most species would call intentional sound, and she had been making it since before she could read because her grandfather had 3 dogs and a porch, and the porch was where you went when something needed to settle. The dogs had taught her, in the way dogs teach things, not with instruction but with repetition, with the simple fact of being calmer when she was calm. The Pelhariketh cadet down the hall stopped, looked at her, went from purple to a color that was not on her chart yet. She wrote it in the notebook that evening, new color, no name, after the rumble. Pelhariketh unknown cadet, not distress, possibly the opposite of distress, need more data. She had no idea that the acoustic monitoring system in Corridor 7C had flagged her vocalization 6 seconds after she made it. She had no idea that the flag had generated a query, or that the query had been routed to the Xenobiology department, or that the Xenobiology department had looked at the flag, and then looked at the waveform, and then looked at each other, and said nothing for a moment. She tightened the cap on her canteen. It dripped if you didn't get it all the way. The Fauna Annex tour was scheduled for day 12. Ren found out about the Vorith cub on day 10. It was not in the orientation document. The orientation document covered fauna interaction protocol in general terms, species categories, threat rating frameworks, the difference between active warning and passive threat behavioral signals. It did not cover the cub by name, by file number, or by incident history, because the Fauna Annex xenobiologist, a Chelhari named Morath, had filed a separate access restriction on all cub-related documentation pending review. Ren found out because Civil found out, and Civil had gone a gray-orange that was new enough that she wrote it down before he finished the sentence. "There is a Vorith juvenile in the annex," Civil said. He was standing in the doorway of Residential Cluster 7 with the document he had somehow accessed. His 3 mouths were doing the thing where they moved slightly out of sync. "It has been in solo quarantine for 31 days. There have been 17 interaction attempts." Ren looked up from the notebook. "How'd the attempts go?" Civil's color shifted toward the gray end of orange-gray. 14 required medical response. 3 required structural repair. Gorak in the corner had stopped grinding. Ren wrote Vorith cub. 17 attempts, 14 medical, 3 structural, quarantine 31 days. Then she wrote below it, solo quarantine 31 days. She looked at that second line for a moment. She did not say anything. She closed the notebook, tucked it into her breast pocket, and went to the canteen station for water. 31 days alone was 31 days alone, whatever you were. Morath, it turned out, was already stressed before the tour started. Ren could tell because his secondary arms were doing the opposite of what Ossel's did. They were not making small, careful adjustments. They were moving in large, repeated arcs, and the translator on his chest was struggling to keep up with the volume. He had a data pad in his left primary hand and a barrier integrity checker in his right, and he was looking at both of them at intervals that suggested he was not reassured by either reading. "Standard procedure," he said, addressing the group of cadets assembled at the annex approach, "is passive observation only. The observation gallery is reinforced. The barrier is reinforced. There will be no direct contact. There will be no vocalization directed at the fauna. There will be no—" He stopped, looked at Ren. "No unusual vocalizations," he said, "from anyone." Ren's expression did not change. She had 9 citations. She was familiar with being looked at. Morath had checked the barrier. The xenobiologist had checked the recording. Ossel had checked the citation form. No one had checked the capacity sign on the annex door. 300 cadets had filed in over 11 minutes, and the annex held 40. And the sign on the door had a number on it that nobody read because the sign had never mattered before. And now the observation gallery was so full that cadets at the back could not see the enclosure floor and cadets at the front were breathing on the glass. Ren was near the middle. She had a clear sightline. Civil was to her left, orange. Gorek was to her right, all 7 arms crossed. Foss was in his suit, by choice this time, not atmospheric necessity. The fog level was medium. The cub was in the back corner of the enclosure. It did not look at them when they came in. It was not the kind of animal that did not look at you because it was calm. It was the kind that did not look at you because it was already making decisions. Ren watched the corner. She watched the way the scaled body shifted its weight back feet first, then the rest. A slow reorientation that was not toward the glass and was not away from it, and was in fact toward nothing at all. It was simply moving the way things moved when they were thinking. She tilted her head. She leaned forward. The cub leaned forward. They both waited to see what the other would do next. Morath checked the barrier reading. It said 100%. He checked it again. The sound, when the cub made it, arrived in the feet first. One note, a long, subsonic pulse that came up through the floor of the observation gallery, through the soles of 40 pairs of boots and the equivalent foot coverings of 260 other species. And the cadets felt it before they processed it, and some of them had already stepped back before their conscious minds had registered what was happening. 2 cadets went down. Not injured, their legs simply decided to sit. Ren felt it in her back teeth. She thought about thunderstorms. She thought about the specific quality of air pressure that built before the big ones came through, the way the ground seemed to harden, and the dogs would find the lowest spot in the barn and press against the walls. She thought, "You're talking." She made the sound back. It was not identical. Her chest cavity was not built for the full lower register. She could not match the floor pulse, the subsonic weight of it. What she produced was the upper edge of the same frequency range, the part that lived in the throat and the chest both, the part she had learned on the porch. Civil went a color with no name. The color started at his outer edge and moved inward, which she had never seen before. It was not orange. It was not gray. It was something that she would write down later and not be able to describe, except to say that it was the color of someone who has just watched physics behave unexpectedly. Morath had both hands on his communicator. The cub did not step back. It made the sound again, shorter this time, a question. Ren felt the edge of a smile start somewhere and decided not to stop it. She made it back, shorter, higher, an answer. From the back of the gallery, someone asked, in a translation that landed in 17 different audio feeds simultaneously, "Is the human broken?" The cub dropped. It did not drop like a falling thing. It dropped like a choice. Front legs down, chest close to the floor, hindquarters up, 3 tails in 3 different registers, the lowest one still, the middle one sweeping, the highest one at a speed that made the air move. The sound it made when it moved like that was not a growl and not a rumble. It was a sound like a brushed snare drum against the enclosure floor, a soft rhythmic percussion that the xenobiology recorder had no category for. She created a new one, mid-session, in real time. She titled it Play Register 3, Juvenile Vorath, no prior classification. The cub bounced. It was not a word that should have applied to something the size of a ground vehicle. It applied anyway. Both front feet left the floor at once and came back down at once, and the enclosure shuddered slightly, and a cadet in the front row made a sound that was not quite a word and sat down on the floor without meaning to. Ren started laughing. It was not a performance. It came up the same way the chest rumble came up, below the level of decision, out of the part of her that recognized something before her brain had named it. She put her hand over her mouth, and it did not help at all. Morath was on his communicator now, talking in a frequency too high for the translator to catch. Gorek had uncrossed all 7 arms. The shift happened in a single moment. 1 second they were folded against her chest, and the next they were at her sides, and the change took up more room than anything else that had happened in the gallery so far. 7 arms at rest on a Thurvani warrior were not a relaxed posture. They were a different kind of attention. She was still watching the enclosure, but she was watching it the way you watched something that had become worth watching. The cub bounced again. The cadet who had asked whether the human was broken had not gotten an answer from anyone in audio range. Gorek had turned to look at whoever had said it. That had been enough. Ren adjusted the collar of her uniform with her left hand. The cadet tissue fabric sat slightly wrong at her left shoulder, and she had not gotten used to it in 11 days. She pulled it flat. The cub's 3 tails were still going. The low one had started moving now, a long, slow sweep that cleared a meter of enclosure floor with each pass. The middle one was faster. The high one was almost too fast to follow. Morath had stepped away from the glass. He was looking at his data pad. He was looking at his communicator. He was looking at his barrier integrity checker. The barrier read 100%. Ren looked at the cub. The cub looked at her. Morath's barrier checker was still reading 100%, and she was still grinning, and the xenobiology recorder had just created a second new category in 8 minutes and somewhere in the back of the gallery. 300 beings who had not planned to watch history were watching it anyway, some of them pressing toward the glass now, some of them still trying to find the exits, and Gorak, 7 arms open, standing exactly where she had been. The question hanging in the room was not whether the barrier would hold. The question was what happens when a door opens. The gallery had split into 3 groups. Nobody had given an order. It happened the way these things happen. The cadets who needed exits found them, the cadets who couldn't move stayed where they were, and the cadets who had decided this was worth seeing pressed closer to the glass. Civil was the second kind. He had gone a color that was past orange and past gray, and was now something closer to the brown of river water in late summer. Not alarmed, exactly, but not anything else either. Gorek was still where she had been, 7 arms at her sides, watching. The cub was still bouncing. Ren was still laughing. Morath had moved away from the glass entirely. He was standing at the secondary monitoring station with his data pad in one hand and his communicator in the other, and he had the look of someone who had prepared for many contingencies and had not prepared for this one. "Cadet Addisa," he said. His translator's volume was slightly off, too loud, then correcting, the way translation software did when it was trying to find a tone that didn't exist in its reference library. "Cadet Addisa, you are directed to cease all directed vocalizations immediately." Ren looked at the cub. The cub was doing a slow, low circle of the enclosure, not pacing, not patrolling, but the particular kind of moving that meant something wanted to come back to a spot and was working out the angle. "Yes, sir," she said. She said it perfectly pleasantly. The cub came back to the spot. The acoustic monitoring system in the fauna annex logged her vocalization at 11:43 that morning. The flag it generated was different from the one in Corridor 7C that one had been filed under unclassified primate vocalization, query pending. This one was filed under unclassified vocalization, non-primate frequency range, source, human, exchange cadet W. Addisa, cohort 7. The addendum note, added by the Xenobiology Department 40 minutes later, read, "No human on record has produced this vocalization. Cross-reference with Earth Origin Vocal Biology Database returned 0 matches in predator response or threat display categories. 3 xenobiologists are currently recording each other discussing this. We will file a full report. 3 different recording devices, aimed at 3 different recording devices. The one nearest the window had caught a corner of the enclosure in the background, where the cub was still doing its low circle, and in the corner of that frame, Ren, hands at her sides, watching it come back. Ren knew none of this. She was watching the cub decide things. It stopped about 2 meters from the barrier. It pressed its nose, the flat, broad end of its snout, against the barrier wall, and its breath left a smear of condensation on the surface. The smell of it came through the secondary ventilation. It hit the observation gallery a few seconds later. Hot metal and something green, something that reminded Ren of the field behind the barn after rain, the specific sharpness of it. She pulled her collar flat with her left hand. The fabric was still wrong at the shoulder. The cub exhaled again. The smear on the barrier was still there when Morath walked back to the glass. He looked at it. He looked at the cub. He looked at his datapad, which had a 31-day interaction log on it, 17 entries, 14 of which had medical response codes appended. Ren's interaction did not have a medical response code. He looked at her. "Cadet Adisa," he said and stopped. He started again. "The Vorath juvenile has been in solo quarantine since intake. The standard bonding protocol is 40 pages. It requires certified handlers, a 12-week proximity phase, graduated contact trials, and full documentation at every stage." He held up the data pad. 40 pages. Ren looked at the data pad. She looked at the cub. The cub had pressed against the barrier now, not hard, just weight, the kind of contact that wasn't trying to break through, but was trying to determine if the thing it was pressing against was worth pressing against. "I'll start with page 1, Ren said. There was a pause. From somewhere in the back third of the gallery, from one of the 300 cadets who had come in over 11 minutes and had not yet left, someone made a sound. It traveled. It became, within 4 seconds, 300 beings making different versions of the same sound, which was the sound of something landing. Morath looked at the gallery. He looked at the 300 cadets who should not have fit in his annex. He looked at the capacity sign he had not checked. He did not understand why they were applauding. Gorek said something. She said it in Thurvani, without triggering her translation device. And it was not directed at Civil, but Civil heard it anyway. And the way his color moved when he heard it, from the river water brown to something lighter, something that was almost the color he'd been the first day before he'd learned to be worried, was the first sign that whatever she had said was not nothing. Ren looked at him. What did she say? Civil's 3 mouths moved slightly out of sync for a moment. He was doing something that looked like choosing. The direct translation is approximate. The Thurvani warrior vocabulary doesn't. It is something like, she has given the small thing a warrior's name. Ren looked at the cub. The cub was still pressed against the barrier. Still warm, still exhaling in long, slow pulses. "I didn't say a name out loud," Ren said. "No," Civil said. "You said it in your chest." Ren thought about that. She thought about the specific note she'd made, the upper edge of the cub's frequency, the version she could reach, the one she had been making back every time. The sound had a shape. The shape had a feel. The feel had, at some point she couldn't identify, become something more like a name than like a noise. "What does it mean?" she said. "The name." Civil was quiet for a moment. "The one who answered," he said. The cub pushed against the barrier with no more force than it had been using. The barrier read 100%. The barrier did not move. Ren looked at the one-word entry she'd written at the top of her fresh page 11 days ago. "Log everything." She wrote the name below it. She did not write it in letters. She drew the shape the sound made. 11 days of paperwork. That was the actual count. Morath filed the interaction log. The interaction log triggered a protocol review. The protocol review generated 3 separate assessment forms, each of which required a department signature, 2 of which required Ossel's signature, and 1 of which required a signature from a Concordance Xenobiological Oversight Board member who was currently in transit between stations and had to be reached by relay message. Ren filled out every form she was asked to fill out. She answered every question. She filed the forms on time. She did not file any new citations during the 11 days, which Ossel noted in a separate log with no visible emotion. She went to the barrier observation window every morning. Not the gallery, the small single-access window on the handler corridor, the one that required a day pass, which Morath issued her without comment after the 3rd morning she showed up. She made the sound. The cub made the sound back. Every morning, 11 mornings. On the 10th morning of the wait, she was sitting on the bunk in residential cluster 7 with the field notebook open on her knee, and the morning's entry half finished when Gorak came through the doorway. Gorek did not knock. Thurvani did not knock. A door that was not locked was an open invitation by their custom, and Ren had learned this on day 3 and adjusted. What was different was that Gorak stopped inside the doorway instead of moving through the room, and she looked at Ren directly, and she placed one of her secondary arms, not a primary, a secondary, the smaller pair on the field notebook. Not on Ren, on the notebook, one arm resting. She said 2 words in Thurvani, soft for her, not the low grinding register she used for most things. Civil was visible in the doorway behind her. His color was the lighter one, the one from the gallery, almost the color of the first day. He translated slowly, like he was measuring. She says, "The one who answered is waiting." Ren looked at the notebook. She looked at Gorak, who had not addressed her directly in 11 days of shared space. 11 days of sharpening and watching and deciding what things were worth. The one who answered. She had used the name in her chest every morning at the window. She had not said it out loud. She had not told anyone what it was. Gorak removed her arm from the notebook and walked back through the doorway. The question Ren held for the next 24 hours was not about the door. The door was paperwork. The question was what it meant when a Thurvani warrior broke 11 days of silence to tell you that something was waiting, and whether the warrior was talking about the cub. Day 12. The handlers were armored, full contact-rated suits, the kind that got issued for level 4 interactions and above. They stood at the threshold in a line, 4 of them, and the way they held the line told you everything about what they thought was going to happen. Morath was behind the reinforced glass. He had his datapad. He had his barrier integrity checker. He had the 40-page protocol document open on a secondary screen. There were 300 cadets in a space that held 40. Nobody had checked the sign on the door, because nobody had expected this to matter again so soon, and the cadets had been filing in for 11 minutes before the gallery was full. Ren stood at the enclosure entrance. The handlers were still there. She looked at them. They looked at her. They looked at Morath. Morath looked at his datapad. "Cadet Adisa," Morath said. His voice came through the external speaker flat and slightly delayed. "The protocol requires certified handlers at all points of." "I know," Ren said. She tucked the field notebook into her breast pocket, checked the clasp. She walked past the handlers and through the door. The enclosure smelled like the cub, hot metal and green, the after-rain sharpness of it, and underneath that something warmer, something that was just the particular smell of a large, warm body in a contained space. The floor was smooth except for the scoring along the south wall, which was where the structural repairs had been made. 3 separate patches, each one a slightly different shade. Ren did not look at those. She walked 4 steps in, stopped, crouched not all the way to the floor, but low enough, small enough. The posture that said, "I am not the kind of thing that is trying to win." She did not look at the cub's eyes. The cub was in the far corner. It was watching her. It had been watching her since the door opened. She could feel it the way you feel things that are very still and very large and very focused on you. A specific quality of attention that was not threat and was not absence but was something in between, something that was still deciding. Ren breathed out, long and slow. She made the sound. One note, not a performance of it, the real one, the one from her grandfather's porch, the one that her body knew before her brain had vocabulary for it. 3 dogs on a summer evening. The specific piece of a porch in the late heat when everything has slowed down and nobody needs anything from anybody. The sound that settled things. The cub crossed 12 meters in 4 seconds. It stopped short of her, not at her. 2 feet of space, which every xenobiologist behind the glass logged at the same moment because the distance was not 0 and not safe, and not what any prior interaction attempt had produced. It pressed its nose to the air between them, deciding. Ren held still. The cub made the sound, lower than hers, slower. The floor moved just slightly. She made it back. A hand, a sound. 2 warm things that had decided without paperwork that this was going to be fine. She raised her right hand, slowly palm forward, then turning the back of her hand first because that was the grammar she knew, the grammar the dogs had taught her. You offered the back first. You let the other thing decide what happened next. The cub pressed its skull into her palm. It was heavier than she expected. Warm through the scales, which were not as hard as they looked, there was give in them, a slight flex, and underneath the flex was a warmth that was just alive, just the particular temperature of a living thing. And underneath the warmth there was a vibration, low, constant, like an engine idling, like something that had been running in one mode for 31 days and had just found another gear. She stayed there. Behind the glass, Morath had stopped checking his tablet. His hands were still holding it. His eyes had left the screen. The tablet read barrier integrity, 100%, and no one in the room was looking at it. One xenobiology student in the back left of the gallery was crying. Her field report would later describe it as an involuntary emotional response. The description would be accurate and not enough. The xenobiology recorder had been logging continuously. Her final entry for the session was 1 word. She typed, recalibrating. The record showed that the Vorath juvenile had displayed no play behavior in 31 days of solo quarantine. Standard juvenile Vorath in a healthy bonded state showed play behavior within 48 hours of intake. The absence of it for 31 days had been logged under stress-related behavioral suppression and flagged for long-term monitoring. Ren had changed the baseline in 11 mornings at a barrier. Nobody said this out loud in the enclosure. Nobody said anything. 300 beings who had not planned to be here stood behind reinforced glass and watched a hand stay on a skull and a skull stay against a hand, and the particular silence of it was not empty. It was the kind of silence that many beings make when they choose, all at once, not to speak. Behind the glass, Gorek did something no one in the room expected. She reached up and removed her translation device from the side of her jaw. She placed it in her belt. She folded all 7 arms against her chest, not crossed, not defensive, but held, the way you held something when you were keeping it. She did not need the translator for whatever she was feeling. She did not have a warrior word for it. That was the thread that nobody in the gallery would be able to close. What did a Thurvani warrior do with a feeling that did not exist in the warrior's language? She watched, her arms stayed held. She didn't move. 300 cadets filed out of the fauna annex without speaking. They went in groups slowly. The ones who left first kept looking back. The ones who left last stopped at the door. Nobody said anything until they were in the junction corridor. And then everyone started at once, which was a kind of speaking but was not. Ren thought later, the same as having words for something. Ossel was at the annex exit. He had a citation pad in one hand, the 10th one, by Ren's count, the first one he hadn't written anything on yet. He was holding it with the careful, considered grip of someone who had been holding it for a while and had not yet decided what to do with it. His secondary arms were moving. They had been moving for 22 days. Small, constant adjustments, the punctuation of a Chelhari commander who had been processing the same situation for 3 weeks without resolution. Ren stopped in front of him. She waited. "Cadet Adisa," he said. His voice was formal. Full title. The translator produced the M-dashes where his mandibles paused. "You walked into a Vorath enclosure." "Yes, sir." "Unarmored." "Yes, sir." Against the recommendation of the certified handling team and prior to completion of the 40-page bonding protocol and without, he stopped. Started again. "Without authorization." "Yes, sir." Ossel looked at the citation pad. He looked at the enclosure door, which was closed now, and the observation glass, which was empty now, and the corridor where 300 cadets had just gone quiet. "Why," he said, it was not quite a question, it was the shape of one. Ren thought about it. She thought about 31 days, and about what 31 days of nothing answering felt like if you were built for something to answer. She thought about the sound, the real one, the porch one, the one that had been in her chest before she had words for anything. "It just wanted someone who wasn't afraid of it, sir," she said. "Most things do." Ossel's secondary arms stopped moving. Between one sentence and the next, they simply stopped, both of them at his sides still. 22 days of constant motion. He looked at the citation pad. He did not write anything on it. 3 new fields appeared in the xenobiological intake forms for Concordance Exchange Station fauna within the next 4 months. The fields were prior solo quarantine duration, juvenile play behavior baseline, and cross-species vocalization response. Nobody credited Ren in the paperwork. Nobody who had been in the annex needed it written down. The lead xenobiologist on the Vorath project took a week off. Her field notes from that week were personal and not filed. When she came back, she rewrote the intake framework from the section on juvenile bonding forward. The document with the cover page, caution, contents may cause existential recalibration, was quietly updated. The new version had a different cover page. It did not have a warning. The orientation briefing cadets who received it in the following term asked why the old one had said what it said. Nobody who had been there could explain it easily. Ren still made the sound every morning. The cub still answered. She had moved from the handler corridor window to the enclosure itself. Day pass, then standing pass, then something that was not quite a pass and not quite a job title, but that everyone in the xenobiology department understood to mean she is going to be there. Don't schedule anything that would require the space. The paperwork for it was Morath's, and he filed it without comment. She had started thinking of the enclosure the way she thought of her grandfather's porch. Not a memory, not a lesson, just a place where something settled. On day 23, Ossel called her into the briefing room. He was sitting behind the long desk. His secondary arms were still. They had been still since the corridor, and they were still now, in the way of something that had found a different setting. He had a form on the desk in front of him, and he had already filled out the top half of it. "The exchange program does not have a category for what you are doing in that annex," he said. Ren waited. "It is not research, it is not certified handling, it is not," he stopped. "It is not passive observation." "No, sir." He looked at the form. He picked up the writing instrument. He wrote something on the line that said role designation. He turned the form around and pushed it across the desk. Ren looked at it. She read the job title he had written. She looked at Ossel. He said nothing. His secondary arms did not move. The amber banding on his shell had not changed, and then in the space between one breath and the next, it faded just slightly, just at the edges, just enough to see. She took the form. The field notebook was on her bunk that night, open to the page with the name on it. The early entries were near the front. Orange equals surrender, grinding equals approval, fog equals everything, and they still held, and she had not changed them. At the bottom of the name page there was a new entry, not words. A sketch pencil, the lines slightly unsteady the way her lines got when she was drawing from memory and not from sight. A shape she didn't have a word for yet, curved and heavy and warm-looking, the press of something large against a palm, the particular weight of something that had decided.